Putin is in a panic as Tokayev cuts off gasoline to Russia. The Russian Federation is losing its last ally and the Kremlin has gone mad. Moscow was caught in a blatant lie and Kazakhstan responded with a crushing blow. It's a disgrace. Russians are rushing to China for gasoline and the Kremlin is left without fuel. Even the pro-government bloggers are in shock. All Russia has left are its army, navy, and North Korea. I would argue about the army and the navy. Putin has nowhere to hide. The Ukrainian armed forces have reached Siberia. Losses are breaking records. June has become a catastrophe for Putin's generals. That's it. 1,000 drones are now heading for Moscow. The Kremlin is in a panic. Budanov has shocked everyone. The end of the war will come this year. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Greetings from Ukraine as well. Today it's Victoria Perepelitsa and the latest events. The Kremlin is starting to experience a real fuel panic. Kazakhstan is abruptly shutting down the gasoline business. Tokayev is tightening the screws at the border, restricting the export of fuel from the country. Moscow has already managed to quarrel with almost its last partner, throwing around loud accusations. When arguments run out, the search for someone to blame begins. And this only confirms that Putin's situation is becoming increasingly critical. The Kremlin has reached a new level of absurdity. In Russia, they suddenly accused Kazakhstan of being involved in a Ukrainian attack. Drones targeting an oil refinery. The scandalous statement was made by Vyacheslav Kalinin, a deputy of the Saratov Regional Duma. Astana responded harshly and called for relying exclusively on verified facts. According to the Russian deputy, a Ukrainian drone supposedly could not have covered such a distance to Omsk on its own, so the launch, he claims, could have taken place from the territory of Kazakhstan. Moreover, Kalinin stated that this issue now needs to be discussed with Astana. Kazakhstan's response was as tough as possible. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs declared that such accusations are completely detached from reality. Astana emphasized that the country's territory and infrastructure are never used for actions against other states. In addition, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged the media and all those spreading such statements to rely exclusively on verified facts.
Certain media outlets are spreading provocative statements about the alleged possible use of the territory of the Republic of Kazakhstan for launching unmanned aerial vehicles used in attacks on targets within the Russian Federation. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan responsibly declares that these claims do not correspond to reality and are not supported by any evidence or facts.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also stated that the Republic of Kazakhstan adheres to international law and its international treaty obligations regarding the maintenance of international and regional security.
We emphasize that the Republic of Kazakhstan proceeds from the principle that its territory, airspace, and infrastructure cannot be used to carry out actions directed against other states. In this regard, we urge media representatives and others to rely solely on verified facts and to refrain from spreading false information.
While the Kremlin tries to find someone to blame, a new trend is gaining momentum in Russia itself, a real gasoline tourism boom. Residents of border regions are already actively discussing trips to Chinese Manchuria for cheap fuel. Dozens of offers are appearing in the chats of Chita and Zabaikalsk. Drive your car to China, fill up the tank, and come back. The prices look much more attractive than those in Russia. Diesel starts at 66 rubles per liter and 95-octane gasoline from 97 rubles. However, you'll have to pay intermediaries separately, and trying to take fuel cans out could lead to problems at Chinese customs. Meanwhile, Russians living closer to the Kazakh border are also going to their neighbors to fill up.
This is the real reason we came to Kazakhstan. We just filled up simply to refuel. 33 tenge divided by 65. Well, anyway, you did the math. It was 40 there.
Right now I'm in Uralsk, that's Kazakhstan, about 200 kilometers from Samara. I stopped at a gas station. Then here are the current fuel prices.
We're at the first gas station in Kazakhstan. Now I'll show you the prices. The prices are in tenge. 95 octane is about 55 rubles in our money.
But even in Kazakhstan, Russians have managed to cause trouble, creating a fuel shortage there too.
Unbelievable. We've lived to see the day. There's no gasoline.
Konchengil? Yes, Konchengil. There is no gas station between Guru, Baital and Okurkov. That's a stretch of about 260 kilometers. The car just pulled up and some other guys also arrived. The gas station isn't working. This is the Almaty-Astana highway. These are the two main cities in Kazakhstan. and there's a problem with gas stations.
Against this backdrop, the authorities of Kazakhstan, who refused the Kremlin's request to supply 50 tons of gasoline as a humanitarian aid act, have stepped up their fight against smugglers trying to transport fuel to Russia. According to Deputy Finance Minister Ersan Bershanov, mobile teams are patrolling border areas around the clock, checking vehicles for hidden tanks not provided for by the factory.
The overall design of the project. During the thorough inspection of this particular passenger bus, a carefully concealed fuel tank was discovered. What is its capacity? The total weight is 1 ton and 100 kilograms. Could you please tell me what specific kind of gasoline this vehicle requires? Additionally, what is the total fuel tank capacity? During the inspection of this Mercedes Sprinter vehicle, an enlarged fuel tank with a capacity of 180 liters was found.
Kazakhstan. Podaj Batashikara, Guzupup Namalda. They have an autocolic for Daula Eptro and Krigizilda.
This vehicle has an enlarged fuel tank with a capacity of 100 liters. At this moment, this violation is being rectified. The fuel tanks are being removed and...
While the Kremlin continues to lose partners, Russian propaganda channels themselves are admitting the unpleasant reality. Putin's Russia has practically no allies left.
Only 3 countries remain: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Hardly significant, weak allies.
Moreover, the most radical propagandists are already demanding that North Korea be officially made Russia's main ally and even admitted into the CSTO. It seems the Kremlin's list of friends is shrinking rapidly, and
let's remember that Russia has 3 allies: the army, the navy, and North Korea. It wouldn't be a bad idea to admit the Koreans into the CSTO.
The geography of the war is rapidly changing for Russia. Zelensky is already talking about a scenario that makes thousands of drones in the sky over Moscow twitch nervously. Meanwhile, air raid alerts are reaching Siberia for the first time, and the largest oil refineries are coming under attack one after another. Why are even regions thousands of kilometers from the front starting to feel the breath of war? How is Ukraine methodically striking at Russia's fuel and logistics system? And why is the map of a safe Russia literally falling apart before our eyes? Stay tuned to find out.
1,000 drones over Moscow would be a death sentence for the Russian Federation. Volodymyr Zelensky voiced a scenario that the Kremlin would prefer never to discuss. According to the president of Ukraine, the moment of truth for Putin will come when massive drone attacks stop being isolated incidents and become the new reality for the Russian capital. Zelensky is convinced that the decisive factor will be not only the military but also the psychological effect. When not just hundreds but thousands of drones start appearing over Moscow at the same time, the Kremlin will have to view the war not through officials' reports but through their own windows. And then Putin's inner circle will start advising him to find a quieter place to work, somewhere far beyond the Urals. And here an uncomfortable question arises for the Russian authorities. If the special operation is going according to plan, then why do they have to think more and more not about new offensives, but about evacuating key facilities and defending their own capital? It seems that the war the Kremlin planned to keep as far away as possible from ordinary Russians is gradually coming home. And the farther from Putin, from Moscow, the closer, according to Kiev's assessment, the moment when the dictator will have to reconsider his entire war strategy. Meanwhile, Russia is burning farther and farther from the front line. The Novosibirsk region, a place that for years in Russia was considered almost unreachable by war, has for the first time declared an air raid alert due to the threat of drone attacks. Such a warning has become an alarming signal for the Russian security system. After all, not long ago, Siberian residents were told that the fighting was happening somewhere very far away. But now the word alert is being heard more and more often, even thousands of kilometers from the front. Novosibirsk is not just a major city, it is one of Russia's main industrial centers, home to hundreds of enterprises in the defense, aviation, engineering and energy sectors. It is here that the Chkalov aviation plant operates, participating in the production of Su-34 Frontline bombers, as well as dozens of other strategically important enterprises, without which the Russian military-industrial complex would feel quite uncomfortable. The geography of alerts in Russia continues to expand rapidly. If previously the Kremlin assured citizens that the danger only concerned border regions, now even Siberian regions have to consider that distance no longer guarantees safety. And this is exactly the scenario that has been increasingly discussed in Kiev lately. The war is gradually reaching places where no one expected to see it. Meanwhile, as Russian officials report on successfully repelling attacks, Ukraine continues its campaign against the oil infrastructure of the aggressor country step by step. In recent months, 9 out of Russia's 10 largest oil refineries have already come under attack. The strike on the Omsk oil refinery, the largest oil processing facility in Russia, caused particular resonance. It is more than 2,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border to the refinery. This means that the drones covered that distance. A distance that, until recently, seemed fantastical, even to many military experts. If people in the Urals once felt absolutely safe, now the very geography of the war for Russia is visibly changing. The Omsk oil refinery was considered one of the key elements of Russia's fuel system. It was precisely this refinery that was expected to help mitigate the effects of the fuel crisis, which has been increasingly felt after a series of attacks on the oil refining industry. In addition, the facility is critically important for further oil processing and for ensuring the operation of other production chains. It is also symbolic that until recently, the Omsk plant remained one of the few major oil refineries in Russia that had never suffered any damage. Now that list has become even shorter. And while officials in Moscow are trying to explain why air raid sirens are sounding even beyond the Urals, good old Belgorod has also come under attack. Drones struck the Belgorod Linear Production Directorate of main gas pipelines, as well as other infrastructure facilities in the region. The strikes also targeted Belgorod International Airport and energy facilities. And although Russian authorities traditionally try to downplay the significance of such events, the trend itself is quite telling. Not only military targets are coming under increasing pressure, but also the hubs that ensure the functioning of logistics, energy, and the transport system in the border regions. Belgorod has long ceased to be a safe rear area for the Kremlin. What was once considered a reliable staging ground for supporting Russian troops has now turned into a territory of constant tension. Air raid alerts, air defense systems in operation, restrictions on infrastructure functioning. All of this is becoming the new everyday reality for the region. And while Russian propaganda continues to paint a picture of an absolutely protected Russia, the map itself seems to be changing right before our eyes. From Belgorod to Omsk, more and more important facilities are forced to think not about development and modernization, but about their own survival. And this is already a completely different reality from the one the Kremlin promised its citizens at the beginning of the war.
The end of the war is closer than ever. Our forces are pressing Russia. Statements by Kirilo Budanov about the real chances of ending hostilities this year have caused a wide public response. Even Western analysts are hinting more and more openly. Moscow's strategy is beginning to show serious cracks. Why is Ukraine betting on strikes against logistics? How is domestic production of long-range weapons changing the rules of the game? Why do even reputable global publications no longer believe in a Russian victory? Let's figure it out right now. Has the war really started moving toward its conclusion? Kirill Budanov's statement has sparked discussions about something that until recently seemed unattainable. There is a real chance that the war could end as early as this year. According to the head of the president's office, such chances do exist. And although the world is now witnessing a new round of escalation, it is precisely this that could become the precondition for future de-escalation and a return to negotiations. It sounds paradoxical, but the history of wars has proven this more than once. Very often, the sides only start looking for compromises after they realize that achieving their goals by force is impossible. And it seems that Kiev understands this logic well. While the Kremlin continues to speak in the language of ultimatums, Ukraine is building up what is increasingly being called its main trump card. Specifically, the production of long-range strike capabilities. Budanov openly admitted that the scale of Ukrainian production has already reached a level that allows for a significant increase in the intensity of strikes on Russian territory. This means that for Moscow, the war is becoming increasingly costly, not only at the front, but also deep in the rear.
They have already become, let's say, exceptionally well established and respectable, which makes it entirely feasible and realistic to substantially increase the overall output
the sheer level of the intensity. And this increased intensity allows specific strategic results to be successfully achieved. For the Kremlin, the entire offensive was gradually turning into an increasingly exhausting and high-stakes gamble. It is precisely those various factors that Moscow considered to be merely secondary just yesterday, that today may ultimately determine the final fate of the entire war. While Russian propaganda counts square kilometers on the map, the Ukrainian strategy is increasingly focused on depleting the enemy's resources. And if this trend continues, the moment when the Kremlin itself will be forced to seriously consider dialogue may come much sooner than many expect. That is why the main question now is what will become the real path to peace. Kyiv is making it clear. Not through concessions, not by freezing the problem, but by creating conditions under which continuing the war will become too costly and futile for Russia. If Budanov's assessments prove correct, then the first real outlines of a future peace may appear precisely after the Kremlin is finally convinced. Time is no longer on its side. The inevitability of Russia's defeat is being discussed outside of Ukraine as well. The influential Western publication Bloomberg essentially acknowledges that the prospect of Russia winning the war against Ukraine no longer looks realistic. This is no longer the assessment of Ukrainian officials or military experts from Kyiv. Such signals are increasingly coming from leading global analytical centers, where they closely monitor developments at the front and the state of the Russian economy. Just a few years ago, the Kremlin was counting on a completely different scenario. But today, even Western observers are noting that Russia's last major offensive has essentially stalled. The cost of every new kilometer of the front for Moscow continues to rise rapidly. Human losses, production problems, labor shortages, and increasing pressure on the economy are creating a situation for the Kremlin that is becoming difficult to conceal, even behind the loudest propaganda slogans. Moreover, Ukrainian drones and missiles are increasingly reaching oil refineries, energy hubs, logistics centers, and military facilities inside Russia itself. What was once considered an inviolable rear is gradually turning into a territory of constant risks. According to many analysts, this is precisely what makes continuing the war much more expensive for the Kremlin than before. Around the world, the conversation is increasingly not about whether Russia can win, but about how and when it will be forced to agree to a cessation of hostilities. Such a shift in rhetoric speaks volumes. Whereas previously discussions revolved around the possible success of a Russian offensive, now more and more attention is being paid to scenarios of a truce and finding a way out of the war. Moreover, in the West, they are now openly discussing not only new aid packages for Ukraine, but also long-term solutions that could ultimately change the balance of power. Among these are strengthening sanctions, increasing deliveries of long-range weaponry, new air defense systems, and even the possibility of producing certain defense systems directly in Ukraine. In other words, the partners are increasingly preparing not for a compromise on the Kremlin's terms, but for a scenario in which Russia will have to accept new rules of the game. The situation looks extremely unpleasant for Moscow. The war, which the Kremlin had planned to finish in a matter of days, has gradually turned into a grueling conflict, where time, resources, and international support are not working in Russia's favor. That is why more and more experts around the world are hinting at it. The moment when the defeat of the Kremlin's plan becomes obvious to everyone, may be much closer than it seems today. And for Russia, this means only one thing: the room for maneuver continues to shrink rapidly. While the Kremlin draws victories on paper, reality for Moscow is turning into a real nightmare. Ukrainian forces are reclaiming territories. Russian logistics are bursting at the seams under drone strikes. The occupiers' losses are breaking records. The Black Sea, once considered the domain of the Russian fleet, is increasingly turning into a zone of constant fear for the Kremlin. And while Peskov talks about great successes, even in the US, they are already openly speaking about the exhaustion of Russia's offensive potential. So what is really happening at the front? Why has June become one of the toughest months for Putin's army? And how is Ukraine step by step taking away Russia's main military advantages? Let's break it down right now. While Russian propaganda paints yet another picture of victory, the Ukrainian armed forces have quietly and without much noise caused a real collapse of the front for the occupiers. In one sector, Ukrainian forces regained control over dozens of square kilometers of territory in just a month and a half, areas that had been considered Russian rear for over a year. And what's most interesting is that this defeat is so painful that the Russians are trying to hide it at any cost. According to preliminary estimates, we're talking about at least 50 square kilometers of liberated land, and some hints from analysts suggest the numbers could be even higher. To put it in perspective, if this data is confirmed, Ukraine could, for the first time in a long while, achieve a positive balance of liberated territories in a single month. And this is already a serious signal to everyone who was quick to write off Ukraine's offensive potential. The enemy's reaction is especially telling. Throughout June, the Russian side published only a few videos from this direction. And even those videos actually showed not the occupiers' successes, but the advance of Ukrainian forces. When an army that usually films every meter of its movement suddenly goes silent, it means only one thing. There's really nothing to talk about there. It seems Ukrainian drones have turned part of the front into a real zone of terror for the occupiers. Russia was forced to bomb its own former positions with dozens of guided aerial bombs trying to stop the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces. But even that didn't help. What was recently considered a Russian bridgehead is gradually coming under the control of Ukrainian troops. And here there is another very important detail. The offensive began with the use of armored vehicles, which, contrary to the predictions of many experts, are far from obsolete. Combined with the widespread use of drones, this allowed them to break through and minimize losses. In fact, Ukrainian forces are demonstrating a new formula for an offensive, where drones not only assist the troops, but actually pave the way for them through the most dangerous sections of the front. And that's not all. In just 1 month, Ukraine's defense forces struck more than 200,000 enemy targets. And behind each of these numbers are destroyed equipment, shattered depots, burned supply routes, and yet another blow to Russia's ability to continue the war. The most painful result for the occupiers. Almost 28,000 Russian soldiers were either eliminated or received wounds so severe that they were put out of action. In fact, June became one of the most difficult months for the Russian army in recent times. And what's important, this is happening more and more often. Ukrainian strikes are reaching the enemy far beyond the front line, in places where they recently still felt relatively safe. The Minister of Defense reported that the number of targets hit at a distance of more than 50 kilometers from the line of contact has almost doubled. In other words, Ukrainian drones and precision strike weapons are penetrating ever deeper into the Russian rear, and this means that for the occupiers, the war no longer ends. Beyond the first line of defense, a special emphasis is placed on logistics. It is logistics that is being hit the hardest today. It seems as if Ukrainian UAV operators have launched a real hunt for anything moving toward the front. Trucks, fuel tankers, motorcycles, ammunition depots, all of this is increasingly going up in smoke before it even reaches Russian positions. June has become a record-breaking month for the defense forces. Ukrainian forces set a record for destroying Russian artillery, achieved their best result ever in intercepting enemy drones, nearly 50,000 units, and also broke the absolute record for destroying the occupiers' vehicles and motorcycles. And most importantly, these are no longer just isolated successful operations, but a systematic campaign to exhaust the enemy. Day after day, Ukrainian drones are methodically tightening the noose around the occupiers' logistics. And it seems that this is exactly what Moscow fears the most. After all, the front can be reinforced with new soldiers, but restoring a destroyed supply system under constant fire from Ukrainian drones is much more difficult. That is why June may turn out to be not just a record-breaking month. Losses for Russia, but the beginning of much more serious problems, lie ahead. And while the Ukrainian armed forces are reclaiming their land meter by meter, it seems the Kremlin has decided to take their favorite approach, simply painting themselves a victory. After another series of successes by Ukrainian forces at the front, Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, suddenly started talking about the great achievements of the Russian army and the inevitable fulfillment of all the war's objectives. However, there is one problem. Once again, reality forgot to coordinate its plans with Kremlin propaganda. While Russians were being told on the radio about a successful offensive, independent analysts carefully studied the maps that Russian generals were showing to Putin. And it turned out that there is a gap of almost 2,000 square kilometers between the front lines and the Kremlin's reports. In other words, if the Ukrainian armed forces are liberating territories in the real world, then the Russian general staff is compensating for this by capturing territories in the world of fantasy. The funniest thing is not even the scale of these fabrications, but their content. On the paper maps for Putin, the Russian army has almost reached Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Supposedly, it has full control over Chasiv Yar and is advancing toward Dobropilya. In some places, it's almost approaching Zaporizhzhia. It gives the impression that the Kremlin boss is being shown not battle reports, but a trailer for yet another science fiction movie. And it is precisely here that it becomes clear why Moscow speaks so confidently about its successes. If you look at maps every day where the army advances faster than common sense, you can believe any fairy tale. The only problem is that the real front exists outside the Kremlin offices. And there, Russian troops are increasingly encountering not drawn arrows, but Ukrainian drones, artillery, and counterattacks. But the most painful blow for the Kremlin, it seems, did not happen on land, but at sea. On Navy Day, Volodymyr Zelensky directly stated that Russia has lost the Black Sea. Just a few years ago, such a statement would have seemed like science fiction. A country without a large navy forced one of the world's largest naval fleets to retreat. After the liberation of Snake Island and a series of strikes on ships, headquarters, bases, and ports, the occupiers have effectively lost the ability to feel like masters of the waters. Today, the Black Sea has become yet another example of how Ukrainian technology and unconventional solutions are breaking Russian military patterns. Naval drones have accomplished what was considered almost impossible until recently. They forced the Russian Black Sea fleet to switch from a show of force to a mode of constant survival. And now Russian ships increasingly resemble not hunters, but prey, constantly looking over their shoulders. It seems this is only the beginning of much bigger problems for Moscow. After all, if the Black Sea is no longer safe for Russian ships, then the Black Sea and Azov regions can no longer be considered the rear area. And while the Kremlin continues to talk about its successes, Ukraine, step by step, is taking away from the enemy what it once considered its undeniable advantage. And what do you think about the latest events? Comment below. Stay tuned for more and like this video. Wishing you clear skies.